The courtroom had never seen anything quite like this. Karen Elizabeth Bradford stood in front of Judge Judy Shindlin with her chin raised, her finger pointed directly at America's most feared television judge, and her voice echoing through the stunned silence with 4 words that would destroy her life forever. "I know my rights, Judge." The declaration came out like a battle cry, like a challenge, like the confident proclamation of someone who had absolutely no idea they were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed into the most humiliating minutes of their entire existence. The cameras captured every second of her defiant expression, the smug certainty in her eyes, the way she clutched her 3-ring binder like it was a shield that would protect her from what was coming. She had no idea that Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the very first question. She had no idea that every condescending comment, every eye roll, every dismissive gesture had been carefully catalogued by a legal mind that had crushed thousands of cases before breakfast. And she definitely had no idea that her internet law degree was about to be exposed as worthless in front of millions of viewers who would spend the next week sharing clips of her complete and total destruction across every social media platform imaginable. What makes this story absolutely insane isn't just that Karen lost her case. It's not even that she got embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in those minutes was so devastatingly brutal, so surgically precise, so educationally savage that it became the most viral courtroom moment in daytime television history. We're talking about a woman who walked into that courtroom believing she had cracked the code of the legal system through months of Google searches and YouTube videos, only to discover that Judge Judy had been practicing law since before Karen was born. Every article she printed from random legal blogs, every statute she highlighted without understanding, every confident assertion of rights she didn't actually possess was about to be systematically demolished by someone who actually went to law school, passed the bar exam, and spent decades as a real judge in Manhattan Family Court, handling actual cases with real consequences. Karen Bradford thought she was untouchable. At middle age, she had spent the better part of a decade perfecting what she called her legal expertise. But what everyone else recognized as the most dangerous combination possible: supreme confidence built on a foundation of complete ignorance. She had successfully bullied customer service workers, intimidated store managers, and extracted refunds and special treatment from restaurants and businesses for years by aggressively shouting about her rights. Every time someone gave in to her demands rather than deal with her tantrum, it reinforced her belief that she understood the law better than the people around her. Every time a minimum wage employee decided it wasn't worth arguing with her, she walked away more convinced that her internet research made her a legal expert. By the time she decided to take her fight to Judge Judy's courtroom, she genuinely believed she was smarter than a woman who had presided over real judicial proceedings for decades. The case seemed simple enough on the surface. Karen was suing her former landlord for what she claimed was an illegal eviction and wrongful retention of her security deposit. She wanted compensation plus damages. But what started as a straightforward tenant dispute had transformed into something much bigger the moment Karen decided she didn't need a lawyer because she had spent months studying landlord-tenant law online. She had filled her binder with printed articles from legal blogs, random statutes she'd found through Google searches, and highlighted passages from court cases she didn't understand. She had posted on social media about how she was going to school Judge Judy on modern legal interpretation and expose the corruption of judges who didn't respect people's rights. She had even practiced her "I know my rights" speech in front of her bathroom mirror, perfecting the tone of righteous indignation that she believed would make her look powerful and knowledgeable on camera. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy's research team had reviewed her paperwork before the show and immediately spotted numerous legal errors and misunderstandings. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy had seen her social media posts bragging about embarrassing the judge on national television. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy had spent the previous evening reviewing actual case law and preparing what legal scholars would later call the most educational takedown in courtroom television history. Karen Bradford had walked into that courtroom thinking she was about to have her moment of glory, her chance to prove that ordinary people with internet access could outsmart the system. Instead, she was about to learn the most painful lesson of her life. And millions of people were going to watch her learn it while crying uncontrollably on national television. Karen Elizabeth Bradford wasn't born an entitled nightmare who terrorized service workers and confused Google searches with legal education. But by the time she reached her early 50s, she had perfected the art of weaponizing partial knowledge and supreme confidence into a lifestyle of getting exactly what she wanted through sheer aggressive persistence. Her transformation into the woman who would eventually humiliate herself on national television had been years in the making, built on a foundation of small victories over people who simply didn't have the energy to fight back against a relentless assertion of rights she didn't actually understand. She had started small, like most people who eventually become monsters of entitlement. A complaint here about a restaurant bill, a demand there for compensation, each one feeding her illusion of power until it consumed her completely. The restaurant meal that resulted in a free dessert, a demand there for a manager who gave her a discount just to make her go away. Each successful intimidation reinforced the neural pathways that told her she was smarter than everyone else, that her interpretation of fairness and legality mattered more than actual rules and regulations. The real turning point in Karen's journey toward courtroom humiliation came about years before her fateful appearance on Judge Judy. She had been fired from her job as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized insurance company, and instead of accepting responsibility for her chronic lateness and confrontational attitude toward coworkers, she decided the termination was illegal and began researching employment law online. She spent hours on legal advice forums, reading blog posts written by people with no legal credentials, and convincing herself that she had discovered violations that even her former employer's lawyers had missed. She drafted a demand letter, using legal terminology she barely understood, filled with threats of lawsuits and citations of statutes that didn't actually apply to her situation. The insurance company, wanting to avoid even the nuisance of dealing with her, offered her a small settlement that she immediately interpreted as proof that she had been right all along. She hadn't been right. They had just decided that a few $1,000s was cheaper than having their HR department waste time responding to her nonsense. But in Karen's mind, she had just won her first legal victory, and it was intoxicating. From that moment forward, Karen threw herself into what she called her legal education, with the obsessive focus that more reasonable people might apply to actual hobbies or productive pursuits. She subscribed to legal YouTube channels run by disbarred attorneys and law school dropouts. She joined online forums where people who had never passed a bar exam gave each other advice about how to represent themselves in court. She printed hundreds of pages of court decisions that she found through random Google searches, highlighting passages that sounded authoritative without understanding the context or whether the cases had been overturned on appeal. Her home office became a shrine to pseudo-legal expertise, with filing cabinets full of articles from blogs with names like knowyourrightsnow.com and selfrepresentation.org. She started referring to herself in social media posts as a legal researcher and citizen advocate. Her Facebook profile picture showed her sitting at a desk surrounded by law books she had never actually read, trying to project an image of scholarly authority that existed only in her imagination. The landlord dispute that would eventually Bring Karen to Judge Judy's courtroom started as most tenant conflicts do, with a misunderstanding about lease terms and cleaning standards that could have been resolved through basic communication and common sense. Karen had rented a small apartment in a suburban complex for over a year, and when she decided to move out, her landlord deducted a portion of her security deposit for carpet cleaning and repairs to walls, where she had hung decorations without permission. A reasonable person might have been annoyed, but would have recognized that the deductions were explicitly allowed in the lease agreement they had signed. Karen, however, saw this as an opportunity to deploy her accumulated legal knowledge in a real-world scenario. She immediately fired off a letter to her former landlord claiming the deductions were illegal under state tenant protection laws, citing multiple statutes that she had completely misunderstood. When the landlord politely explained that the lease agreement clearly outlined these potential deductions and that they were well within legal bounds, Karen interpreted this response as evidence that she was being taken advantage of by someone who hoped she didn't know her rights. Over the next few months, Karen escalated her demands from the original deduction to a full refund of her deposit, plus additional money for what she claimed was emotional distress and harassment. She sent weekly letters filled with legal terminology copied from internet sources. She filed complaints with the local housing authority that were dismissed because they had no merit. She left negative reviews on every platform she could find, not just criticizing the apartment complex, but specifically claiming that the landlord was violating federal housing regulations. She became so consumed with this fight that it took over her life, spending hours each day researching new legal theories and drafting increasingly aggressive demands. When her former landlord finally stopped responding to her letters entirely, Karen made the decision that would change everything. She was going to take this fight to television court, specifically to Judge Judy, because she wanted a platform to expose what she believed was systematic corruption in the landlord-tenant system. She filled out the application for the show with confidence bordering on delusion, actually writing in her submission that she was excited to educate Judge Judy about modern tenant rights law. The producers, recognizing immediately that they had found television gold in the form of a completely delusional pseudo-legal expert, accepted her case within days. Karen Bradford had made the single worst mistake possible when selecting her target for legal combat. She had somehow convinced herself that daytime television judges were just actors reading scripts, that their authority was purely theatrical, and that someone with her level of internet research could easily expose the performance for what she believed it to be. What Karen didn't realize was that she was about to walk straight into the most educational and humiliating defeat of her life, one that millions of viewers would never forget. Didn't understand. What she couldn't possibly have comprehended through her fog of delusional confidence was that Judge Judy Shinland represented everything her fake expertise wasn't. While Karen had spent years reading blog posts and watching YouTube videos, Judge Judy had spent years as a family court judge in Manhattan, one of the busiest and most challenging judicial assignments in the entire American legal system. She had presided over more than actual cases involving real people with real problems and real legal consequences. She had seen every type of liar, every variety of scammer, and every breed of person who thought they could manipulate the system through confidence and aggression. She had developed what legal scholars called an almost supernatural ability to identify frauds and fools within the first seconds of meeting them. And she had built her television career on the foundation of that hard-earned judicial expertise. Judge Judy hadn't become America's highest-paid television personality by being soft on people who disrespected the law or who thought arrogance could substitute for actual knowledge. She had earned her reputation through decades of holding people accountable with a combination of legal precision and devastating directness that left no room for excuses or manipulation. When her producers brought her Karen's case file, she had recognized immediately what she was dealing with. The paperwork was filled with legal citations that were either completely irrelevant to tenant law or were taken so far out of context that they meant the opposite of what Karen thought they meant. The demand letter Karen had submitted referenced constitutional rights that had nothing to do with security deposits, confused state statutes with federal regulations, and quoted from court cases that had been overturned years ago. Judge Judy's research team had compiled a devastating file on Karen's complete lack of legal understanding. But Judge Judy had decided to do something more valuable than simply ruling against her. She was going to use this case to teach millions of viewers what real law looked like. And she was going to do it by systematically dismantling every false claim Karen made, until there was nothing left but tears and humiliation. The courtroom atmosphere that morning was electric with anticipation. Karen had arrived hours early, her 3-ring binder clutched protectively against her chest like a talisman that would ward off any criticism of her preparation. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue suit that she thought made her look professional and authoritative, paired with reading glasses that she hoped would make her appear scholarly and serious. She had spent the waiting time flipping through her binder, reviewing her highlighted passages, and practicing her key phrases under her breath. When she finally walked into the courtroom and took her place at the defendant's table, her confidence was so absolute that it bordered on manic. She made direct eye contact with the cameras, already imagining how she would look to the millions of viewers she assumed would be impressed by her legal knowledge. She arranged her binder on the table with deliberate care, making sure the thickness of her research was visible to everyone in the room. She even allowed herself a small smile when Judge Judy entered, completely misreading the situation and believing that the judge's professional demeanor meant she hadn't yet realized who she was dealing with. Judge Judy's opening was deceptively simple and straightforward, exactly as she had planned it. "Ms. Bradford, you're suing your former landlord claiming a legal deduction of your security deposit. Is that correct?" Karen's response was immediate and revealed everything wrong with her approach in just a few sentences. "Yes, Your Honor, that's correct. And I'm also seeking additional damages for the illegal harassment I endured when I tried to assert my rights as a tenant under state and federal protection statutes." She delivered these words with the kind of practiced confidence that came from months of rehearsal, her voice carrying just enough righteous indignation to suggest that she was the victim of a grave injustice. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly, a warning sign that experienced viewers of her show recognized immediately as the beginning of something devastating. But Karen was too focused on her performance to notice the danger she was already in. The questions continued, each one simple and direct, each one designed to let Karen dig her hole deeper. "Can you explain which specific statutes you believe were violated?" Judge Judy asked, her tone still professional and measured. Karen eagerly flipped open her binder to a page she had marked with multiple colored tabs, clearly excited to demonstrate her research. "According to my extensive legal research, Your Honor, the landlord violated Title of the Fair Housing Act, the amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and multiple state consumer protection statutes that prohibit predatory practices against vulnerable tenants." She read these citations with the kind of confidence that would have been impressive if any of them had actually applied to her situation. The Fair Housing Act dealt with discrimination in housing, not security deposit disputes. The amendment applied to government action, not private landlord-tenant relationships, and the consumer protection statutes she referenced were designed for entirely different types of commercial transactions. But Karen had found these impressive-sounding legal terms through her Google searches, and she had convinced herself that stringing them together made her sound knowledgeable and authoritative. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair slightly. That subtle movement that regular viewers knew meant she was about to destroy someone's entire argument. "Ms. Bradford, Do you understand what the Fair Housing Act actually covers? The question seemed innocent enough, almost curious, but it was actually the first carefully placed explosive in what would become a systematic demolition of everything Karen thought she knew about law. Karen's response to Judge Judy's question about the Fair Housing Act revealed the fatal flaw in her entire approach to legal knowledge. Of course, I understand it, Your Honor. It protects tenants from illegal actions by landlords, which is exactly what happened in my case. She delivered this answer with the kind of exasperated confidence that suggested she couldn't believe she was being asked such a basic question, as if Judge Judy was the one who needed education about fundamental legal principles. The courtroom audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something terrible was about to happen, but not yet understanding the full scope of the destruction Judge Judy was preparing to unleash. Karen, completely oblivious to the volcanic eruption building behind Judge Judy's controlled exterior, actually went further and added with a dismissive wave of her hand, "I know my rights, Judge, and I know when they've been violated." Those words, delivered with such absolute certainty, became the trigger that released Judge Judy's full arsenal of judicial authority and legal expertise. Judge Judy's voice dropped to that dangerously quiet tone that made seasoned attorneys break out in cold sweats and caused defendants to suddenly remember they had somewhere else they needed to be. "Ms. Bradford, let me educate you about what the Fair Housing Act actually covers, since you clearly have no idea, despite your claims of extensive legal research. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. It has absolutely nothing to do with security deposit disputes between landlords and tenants. Nothing. Zero. You have cited a federal civil rights law in a case about carpet cleaning and wall repairs." She paused to let that devastating truth sink in, watching as the first cracks appeared in Karen's confident facade. The audience gasped audibly as they realized they were witnessing not just a legal ruling, but a complete educational dismantling of someone who had confused internet searches with actual knowledge. Karen's face went through a rapid color transformation, from confident pink to confused pale to defensive red as she frantically flipped through her binder looking for support that didn't exist. "But, Your Honor, I read multiple articles that said tenants have rights under this act," she stammered, her voice losing its earlier authority and taking on a desperate edge that betrayed her growing panic. Judge Judy was merciless in her response, leaning forward with the expression that meant someone was about to be professionally destroyed on national television. "You read articles written by people who don't understand the law any better than you do, Ms. Bradford. And that's the problem with thinking Google makes you a lawyer. You've spent months collecting garbage from unreliable sources and convincing yourself it's legal expertise." Judge Judy then reached for Karen's binder, and what happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media as the perfect example of what happens when fake expertise meets real authority. Judge Judy picked up the binder and began going through it page by page with the systematic precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Except in this case, the tumor was Karen's entire sense of intellectual superiority. This article from legaladviceforever1.com was written by someone who was disbarred in 2 states for incompetence. This blog post you've highlighted is from a website that doesn't even list author credentials because they don't have any. This court case you've cited so prominently was overturned on appeal years ago and is no longer valid precedent, which you would know if you had access to actual legal research databases instead of just Google searches. With each revelation, Karen's binder transformed from her shield of confidence into evidence of her complete ignorance, and her face showed the dawning horror of someone realizing they had just humiliated themselves on national television. in front of millions of viewers who would never let her forget this moment. But Judge Judy wasn't finished with her devastating education. She moved on to Karen's citation of the amendment, and her voice carried the weight of decades of actual judicial experience, crushing the delusions of a woman who had thought watching YouTube videos made her a constitutional scholar. Ms. Bradford, you've claimed your landlord violated the amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Do you even know what that amendment requires? Karen tried to respond, but her voice came out as a weak whisper that the microphones barely picked up. It protects people from being treated unfairly. Judge Judy's response was swift and brutal. The amendment applies to state action, Ms. Bradford. State action. It restricts what the government can do, not what private landlords can do in civil disputes. Your landlord is not the government. This is not a constitutional case. You have cited one of the most important amendments in American history in a situation where it has absolutely no application whatsoever. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as everyone present understood. They were witnessing something unprecedented. A complete and total dismantling. The total exposure of intellectual fraud was happening in real time, with no possibility of recovery or redemption. Karen's hands were visibly shaking now as she desperately tried to find something in her binder that Judge Judy hadn't already destroyed. Some article or citation that would prove she wasn't completely ignorant about everything she had claimed to understand. But, Your Honor, I spent months researching this case, she pleaded, her voice cracking with the first hints of tears that would soon flow freely. I know my rights. I know what the law says. Judge Judy's final blow was delivered with the devastating precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. No, Miss Bradford, you don't know your rights. You don't know what the law says. You know what random internet strangers told you the law says. You have confused confidence with competence, and you have wasted this court's time with legal claims that have no basis in actual law. And now you're going to learn what happens when someone who thinks they're a legal expert meets someone who actually is one. The transformation that occurred in Karen Bradford over the next several minutes was so complete, so utterly devastating, that it redefined what millions of viewers understood about the consequences of arrogance meeting expertise. Sati Thorne, the woman who had strutted into the courtroom with her binder held high like a weapon, who had pointed her finger at Judge Judy and declared her knowledge of rights she didn't understand, who had posted on social media about schooling a television judge on real law, was about to experience the most humiliating emotional collapse ever captured on daytime television. Judge Judy wasn't just ruling against her, she was systematically dismantling every false belief that had allowed Karen to terrorize service workers and intimidate people who didn't have the knowledge or authority to fight back against her aggressive assertions of fake legal expertise. The cameras captured every second of Karen's disintegration. From the moment her confident expression cracked into confusion, then panic, then finally desperate, tears that would be shared across every social media platform as a cautionary tale about what happens when you confuse Google searches with actual education. Judge Judy continued her devastating legal education with the relentless precision of someone who had spent decades dealing with people, exactly like Karen, people who thought volume and confidence could substitute for actual knowledge, people who had successfully bullied their way through life until they finally encountered someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated. Ms. Bradford, let me explain something to you that you clearly don't understand despite your months of so-called research. The law is not a collection of impressive-sounding phrases you can throw around to get what you want. It's a complex system that requires years of study, practical application, and genuine understanding of how different statutes, regulations, and precedents interact with each other. You have demonstrated today that you possess none of that understanding. You have cited laws that don't apply to your situation. You have referenced court cases you clearly never read beyond finding them in a Google search. You have confused constitutional protections with contract law, federal discrimination statutes with state tenant regulations, and basic legal terminology with actual legal arguments. Her voice rose with each point, building to a crescendo that echoed through the courtroom like thunder, and Karen's face showed the progression of someone's entire worldview collapsing in real time. The tears started slowly. Just a shimmer in Karen's eyes that she tried desperately to blink away, because crying would mean admitting she was wrong. And her entire identity for the past several years had been built on the foundation of being the one person in every room who actually understood how things worked. But as Judge Judy continued laying out the systematic destruction of every legal claim Karen had made, the tears came faster and harder, until mascara was running down her cheeks in dark streams that made her look like a melting wax figure of her former confident self. "Your Honor, please," Karen sobbed, her voice stripped of all its earlier authority and reduced to the desperate pleading of someone who had just realized the full scope of their public humiliation. "I thought I was right. I spent so much time researching. I really believed I understood the law." The admission came out between gasping breaths as years of false confidence crumbled into the crushing weight of reality. And the courtroom audience watched in fascinated horror as the same woman who had been lecturing Judge Judy about legal interpretation minutes earlier was now begging for mercy, like a child who had been caught in a lie. Judge Judy's response contained no sympathy, no softening of her devastating assessment, because she understood that Karen needed to learn this lesson in the most painful way possible. Or she would walk out of this courtroom and continue terrorizing people who couldn't fight back against her aggressive ignorance. You thought you were right because you surrounded yourself with other people who don't understand the law. Miss Bradford, you spent months reading articles written by people who failed the bar exam, watching videos made by disbarred attorneys, and convincing yourself that this constituted legal education. You joined online forums where people who have never set foot in a law school gave each other advice about how to represent themselves in court, and you became so confident in your false knowledge that you actually believed you could come into my courtroom and lecture me about legal interpretation. Me, someone who spent years in law school. Judge Judy continued firmly. Me, someone who spent years in law school, passed one of the hardest bar exams in the country, and presided over thousands of real cases with real legal consequences. The comparison was brutal and undeniable, and Karen's sobbing intensified as she was forced to confront the gap between her imagined expertise and Judge Judy's actual lifetime of legal achievement. The ruling itself was swift and merciless, delivered with the finality of a guillotine blade, ending any hope Karen might have harbored that she could somehow salvage something from this disaster. I find in favor of the plaintiff, the landlord, on all counts. The security deposit deductions were legal, proper, and clearly outlined in the lease agreement that you signed. You have no case under the Fair Housing Act because that law doesn't apply to your situation. You have no constitutional claim because the 14th Amendment doesn't govern private landlord-tenant disputes. You have no basis for emotional distress damages because being held accountable for damage you caused to someone else's property is not harassment. Furthermore, I am awarding court costs to the defendant in the amount of $2,500 because you have wasted this court's time with frivolous legal claims based on research you didn't understand. You will pay a total of $300, and you will do it while remembering that the next time you want to tell someone you know your rights, you should actually take the time to learn what those rights are. The gavel came down with explosive finality, And Karen's breakdown reached its peak as she realized she hadn't just lost her case. She had lost it so spectacularly that she would forever be remembered as the woman who thought Google made her a lawyer. The bailiff had to physically assist Karen out of the courtroom because she was crying so hard she could barely stand. Her designer suit was now rumpled and stained with tears, her carefully styled hair disheveled from running her hands through it in distress. Her expensive binder, full of useless research, was left scattered across the defendant's table like the debris of a demolished building. The landlord, a quiet, middle-aged man who had simply wanted his legitimate cleaning costs reimbursed, sat in stunned relief as he realized that justice had been served in the most comprehensive way possible. The audience erupted in applause, not just for the ruling, but for the educational masterclass they had just witnessed, for Judge Judy's systematic dismantling of entitled ignorance, for the clear demonstration that real expertise matters and fake knowledge has consequences. Within hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across social media with a virality that exceeded even the most dramatic Judge Judy moments from previous years. The hashtag Tabi I Know My Rights began trending worldwide, as millions of people shared the video with captions like, "This is what happens when you confuse Google with law school," and "The moment fake expertise met real authority." Legally unforgettable. Professionals shared the clip in bar association groups, praising Judge Judy's patient but devastating education about the difference between actual legal knowledge and internet research. Law schools added the footage to their professional responsibility courses as an example of why representing yourself without proper legal training can lead to catastrophic results. Karen's name became synonymous with the dangers of overconfidence built on a foundation of ignorance, and her tear-stained face became a meme representing everyone who had ever thought they knew more than actual experts in any field. The broader impact of Karen's humiliation extended far beyond social media entertainment. Customer service workers across the country reported feeling vindicated as they watched someone who embodied every difficult customer they had ever dealt with finally face consequences for her aggressive assertions of rights she didn't understand. Managers shared the clip in training sessions about how to handle customers who claim legal violations without basis. Landlords used the footage to educate tenants about the actual laws governing security deposits versus the misinformation spread on internet forums. And perhaps most importantly, millions of people who had been tempted to represent themselves in legal matters after doing some online research reconsidered their plans and decided that maybe actual attorneys existed for a reason. Karen Bradford had wanted to become famous for exposing judicial corruption and educating America about tenant rights. Instead, she became the most memorable example in television history of why confidence without competence is not just embarrassing, but potentially financially devastating. Judge Judy had delivered more than a legal ruling that day. She had given the world a masterclass in why expertise matters, why real education cannot be replaced by internet searches, and why the 4 words "I know my rights" mean absolutely nothing if you don't actually know your rights. The phone camera was shaking slightly as Madison Chin whispered into it, her perfectly manicured finger pressed against her glossy lips in a shushing gesture. "Watch me absolutely destroy this boomer judge. Guys, this is going to be the best content ever." She was sitting in Judge Judy's actual courtroom, live streaming to her 847,000 TikTok followers, completely unaware that she was documenting the beginning of her own social media execution. What happened in the next 12 minutes wouldn't just end her court case. It would obliterate her entire influencer empire, turn her loyal followers into her harshest critics, and transform her from internet celebrity into the most hated person on social media. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Madison didn't just lose her case and walk away embarrassed. What Judge Judy did to her was so legally devastating, so perfectly calculated, that it resulted in the permanent destruction of her TikTok account, the loss of over $300,000 in annual income, and a courtroom ban that became the most watched legal moment in Internet history. Before we dive into how this clout-chasing influencer got completely annihilated by America's toughest judge, make sure you smash that like button if you're ready to see what happens when Internet fame collides with real-world consequences. Hit subscribe, because what Judge Judy uncovered in Madison's TikTok history will absolutely shock you. And drop a comment saying, "Justice served," if you think influencers need to face the same rules as everyone else. Trust me, you've never seen a takedown this brutal, this satisfying, or this permanent. Madison Chen had built her entire career on a simple but toxic formula. Find people having bad days, provoke them until they react, film their breakdown, and post it for millions of views. At 28 years old, she had perfected the art of turning human suffering into viral content. Her TikTok bio read, "Professional Karen Hunter," with a little trophy emoji, and her content strategy was as calculated as it was cruel. She would walk into restaurants, retail stores, and service businesses with her phone ready and her attitude dialed up to maximum entitlement. Then she would create problems, complicated orders with impossible modifications, complaints about wait times that were completely reasonable, aggressive confrontations over minor issues that normal people would just ignore. And when the exhausted service worker finally showed frustration or emotion, Madison would capture it all on camera, edit it to make herself look like the victim, and upload it with mocking captions and laughing emojis. Her followers ate it up. Every video of a crying cashier or frustrated manager would rack up millions of views. The comments would flood in with people calling the workers Karens. Even though Madison was the one causing the chaos, she had somehow convinced nearly 1 million people that filming service workers without consent and deliberately provoking them for content was not just acceptable but entertaining. And it was making her rich. Each viral video generated between $15,000 and $30,000 in ad revenue. Brand sponsorships paid her $50,000 or more. The TikTok Creator Fund sent her monthly checks. Madison had turned Karen hunting into a 6-figure business, and she was proud of it. She posted her earnings, showed off her designer purchases, and bragged about how she had figured out the algorithm. But what Madison called content creation, her victims called harassment. And there were a lot of victims. The video that finally brought Madison to Judge Judy's courtroom was her most viewed and most cruel. Jessica Morales was a 34-year-old restaurant manager working double shifts to support her 2 children after a difficult divorce. She was already exhausted when Madison walked into her restaurant with 3 friends, all of them holding phones like they were carrying weapons. Madison had ordered something intentionally complicated with modifications that would take extra time, then immediately started complaining about how long it was taking. When Jessica politely explained that custom orders required a few extra minutes, Madison exploded, not because she was actually upset, but because she needed the content. For 20 minutes, Madison berated Jessica in front of the entire restaurant. She called her incompetent, demanded to speak to corporate, threatened to have her fired, and made sure every second was captured on camera from multiple angles. Jessica tried to stay professional, but the stress of the confrontation combined with months of exhaustion triggered a panic attack. She couldn't breathe. Her hands were shaking. Tears started streaming down her face as she struggled to compose herself in front of her staff and customers. A normal person would have stopped. A decent person would have apologized. Madison zoomed in closer and kept filming. She posted the video that same night with the caption, "When Karens can't handle being called out," followed by 3 crying, laughing emojis. The video exploded. 4.2 million views, 890,000 likes. thousands of comments mocking Jessica, calling her weak, saying she deserved to be fired. And she was. The restaurant's corporate office, terrified of the bad publicity, and the mob of Madison's followers threatening to leave negative reviews, terminated Jessica's employment 3 days later. Jessica Morales had never imagined that going to work would result in her life being destroyed by a stranger with a smartphone. After the video went viral, everything fell apart with devastating speed. She lost her job, which meant she couldn't make rent. Her children saw their mother being mocked by millions of people online, with strangers leaving cruel comments calling her pathetic and saying she deserved everything she got. Jessica fell into a deep depression, unable to sleep, unable to stop refreshing the video to see the view count climbing higher and higher. Every view felt like another person witnessing her worst moment. Every comment felt like another knife in her back. She applied to dozens of jobs, but potential employers would search her name and find the video. Nobody wanted to hire the woman who had a panic attack on camera. Madison had turned Jessica's breakdown into entertainment, and Jessica had become unemployable because of it. The financial devastation was immediate and brutal. Without income, Jessica burned through her savings in weeks. She had to ask family for help with basic expenses. Her car got repossessed. She couldn't afford therapy, even though she desperately needed it. Meanwhile, Madison was posting videos about her new designer handbag, purchased with the money she made from Jessica's suffering. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was Madison's entire business model. And Jessica wasn't her first victim. She wasn't even close. Madison had been perfecting her harassment techniques for over 2 years, leaving a trail of destroyed lives behind her perfectly curated Instagram aesthetic. When investigators later went through Madison's content history, they found a pattern that was as disturbing as it was deliberate. There was the grocery store cashier, a 19-year-old college student working her way through school. Madison had filmed her crying after Madison spent 15 minutes berating her over a coupon dispute. That video got 2.1 million views. The comment section turned into a harassment campaign, with Madison's followers finding the girl's social media and flooding it with abuse, until she deleted everything. There was the coffee shop barista, a 23-year-old aspiring artist who made the mistake of getting Madison's order slightly wrong. Madison didn't just film the interaction, she doxed the coffee shop's location and encouraged her followers to leave 1-star reviews. That video got 3.7 million views, and the coffee shop lost so much business they had to lay off staff. There was the Uber driver, a 62-year-old immigrant trying to earn extra money for his medical bills. Madison had intentionally provoked an argument about the route he was taking, then filmed him getting frustrated when she refused to stop arguing. She posted it with the implication that he was dangerous. That video got 1.9 million views, and the driver was deactivated from the platform, losing his primary source of income. Each video followed the same formula. Madison would identify someone vulnerable, someone working a minimum wage job, someone who couldn't afford lawyers or PR teams, someone who had no power to fight back. Then she would create a confrontation specifically designed to provoke an emotional reaction. She would film their distress from the most unflattering angles possible. She would edit the footage to remove context that showed her instigating the conflict. And she would post it with captions that painted her as the victim and her target as an unreasonable Karen. Her followers, many of them young people who didn't understand the real-world consequences of viral harassment, would dogpile on the victim. They would find their social media accounts, leave cruel comments, and contact their employers demanding they be fired. Madison had weaponized her platform, turning 847,000 followers into an army of harassment that she could deploy with a single post. The money was substantial, and it was addictive. Madison wasn't creating content because she believed in holding people accountable or calling out bad behavior. She was creating content because it was profitable. even tens of thousands of dollars. Brand deals with fashion companies and lifestyle products meant monthly payments that exceeded what most people earned in a year. She had turned cruelty into a career, and she was good at it. He crossing her path. But each viral video meant tens of thousands of dollars. Brand deals with fashion companies and lifestyle products meant monthly payments that exceeded what most people earned in a year. She had turned cruelty into a career, and she was good at it. Her apartment was filled with PR packages from companies desperate to be associated with her engagement numbers. Her closet was stuffed with designer clothes purchased with harassment money. Her Instagram stories showed a life of luxury funded entirely by the suffering of working-class people who had the misfortune of crossing her path. But Madison had made a critical error in her calculation. She had assumed that her follower count made her untouchable. She had convinced herself that because her content was popular, it must be acceptable. She had interpreted the lack of consequences as permission to escalate. When Jessica Morales decided to sue her for intentional infliction of emotional distress, loss of income, and violation of privacy rights, everything changed. Defamation, Madison didn't take it seriously. She saw it as content. Another opportunity to film herself being the victim of someone trying to cancel her for no reason. She posted about the lawsuit on TikTok with the caption, "Going to court tomorrow to school a boomer judge on internet culture. This is going to be epic content." Followed by 3 fire emojis. That video got 2.3 million views and thousands of comments from her followers promising to support her and ratio anyone who disagreed. Madison Chin arrived at the courthouse like she was attending a red carpet premiere rather than facing a lawsuit for destroying someone's life. She had spent 2 hours that morning perfecting her appearance for what she called her court debut. Her blonde highlights were freshly done from an expensive salon visit. Her makeup was flawless, applied specifically to look good on camera with extra attention to contouring that would photograph well. She wore a designer outfit that walked the line between courtroom appropriate and Instagram worthy. Something that would look professional enough for the judge, but stylish enough to go viral on social media. Her leather portfolio bag, which should have contained legal documents and notes about her case, instead held a ring light, a backup phone for recording, and a portable charger to make sure she didn't miss a single moment of content. She wasn't alone. 3 of her friends had come along, all wearing matching Team Maddie t-shirts like this was a sporting event rather than a legal proceeding. They positioned themselves in the gallery with their phones ready, waiting to capture every moment. Madison had even arranged for what she called a documentary crew, which was really just a guy she knew who owned a nice camera and was willing to film in exchange for exposure on her platform. T-Truth. She was treating this entire lawsuit as a content opportunity. Another chapter in her narrative of being targeted by people who just didn't understand internet culture. As she walked up the courthouse steps, she stopped every few feet to take selfies, posing with the building in the background and posting them to her Instagram story with captions like, "Serving looks in court today," and "Judge Judy has no idea what's about to hit her." Inside the courthouse, Madison's behavior didn't improve. She was loudly FaceTiming with someone in the hallway, her voice echoing off the marble walls as she described how boring and outdated everything looked. When a court officer politely asked her to lower her voice, she rolled her eyes dramatically and said, "This is literally a public building. I can talk as loud as I want." She pulled out her phone every few seconds to check notifications, respond to comments, and film quick updates for her followers. As she entered the courtroom, she was live streaming to a private Instagram account, whispering commentary about how crazy it was that she had to be there. Just making content. A bailiff noticed and approached her, asking her to turn off her phone. Madison's response was immediate and entitled. It's called freedom of the press. Look it up." She made a show of putting the phone in her bag, but she didn't turn it off. She just positioned it so the camera was still recording, streaming everything from inside her designer purse. What Madison didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that Judge Judy had been preparing for this case with the thoroughness of a military operation. For weeks, Judge Judy's research team had been downloading and archiving every single video Madison had ever posted. They found dozens of videos showing Madison harassing service workers. They documented a pattern of deliberately provoking confrontations. They tracked down and interviewed many of Madison's previous victims, people whose lives had been damaged or destroyed by her content. They subpoenaed Madison's financial records from TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, obtaining exact figures showing how much money she had made from each harassment video. They analyzed her direct messages and found conversations where Madison explicitly discussed targeting specific people for content. They even found messages where she told friends she was planning to make Jessica cry for a viral video. Most importantly, Judge Judy's team had contacted TikTok's legal department directly. They presented evidence of systematic harassment and violations of community guidelines. They documented how Madison's content encouraged coordinated harassment campaigns against private individuals. They showed that Madison wasn't just creating controversial content. She was violating the platform's terms of service. TikTok's lawyers were very interested in the case, not because they cared about justice, but because they were terrified of legal liability. If Madison's harassment content continued, it could open the platform up to lawsuits from victims. The company had been looking for a test case to demonstrate that they took harassment seriously, and Madison Chen had just volunteered herself. Judge Judy knew Madison's entire strategy before the girl even walked through the door. She had watched Madison's video announcing her intention to school a boomer judge. She had seen comments from Madison's followers planning to flood social media with support. She had read Madison's direct messages where she described the lawsuit as free publicity and predicted she would gain followers from the controversy. Judge Judy had built a career on reading people, and she could see exactly what Madison was: a narcissist who had convinced herself that her follower count made her immune to consequences, a bully who had found a profitable way to torment vulnerable people, a predator who had weaponized social media to destroy lives for entertainment and profit. And Judge Judy was about to teach her a lesson that no amount of followers could protect her from. The moment Judge Judy entered the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted like air pressure dropping before a storm. Everyone stood as protocol demanded. Everyone except Madison, who was still fiddling with her phone under the table until her lawyer frantically nudged her to stand up. Judge Judy took her seat with the calm, measured movements of someone who had presided over thousands of cases and knew exactly how this one was going to end. She reviewed her notes for a moment, letting the silence build, then looked up with those sharp, penetrating eyes that had made criminals and liars squirm for decades. The opening statements began with Jessica's lawyer presenting the case with straightforward clarity. He showed the video of Madison harassing Jessica. He documented the panic attack, the job loss, and the financial devastation that followed. He showed the cruel comments from Madison's followers and the harassment campaign that had made Jessica's life unbearable. Throughout this presentation, Madison sat at the defendant's table with visible contempt on her face. She rolled her eyes when Jessica's lawyer described the emotional trauma. She sighed loudly when he mentioned the panic attack. She even smiled slightly when her viral video was played in court, like she was proud of her work. When it was Madison's turn to defend herself, she stood up with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for anything in her entire life. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is literally just Gen Z humor. Nobody actually got hurt. It's called content creation. Maybe if Jessica wasn't such a... She paused, clearly about to say something insulting before remembering where she was. Maybe if she could handle customer feedback, none of this would have happened. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Sit down, Ms. Chen." Madison sat, but the smirk never left her face. She thought she was winning. She thought her confident attitude was impressing the judge. She had no idea she was digging her own grave with every eye roll and every dismissive gesture. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Madison with uncomfortable intensity. "Ms. Chen, are you currently recording these proceedings?" Madison's response came too quickly, too defensively. "No, Your Honor, I'm not recording anything." Judge Judy didn't break eye contact. "Bailiff, please check Ms. Chen's devices." Madison's face flashed with panic for just a second before she recovered her composure. "This is literally a violation of my rights. You can't just search my stuff without permission. This is America." Judge Judy's response was ice cold. "This is my courtroom, and you will follow my rules. Bailiff, proceed." 15. The bailiff collected Madison's designer bag and began removing items, the primary phone actively streaming to hundreds of viewers on a private Instagram Live, the backup phone hidden in a side pocket recording video for her so-called documentary, the ring light carefully wrapped in a silk scarf, extra batteries, and chargers. It was an entire mobile content creation studio disguised as courtroom materials. The revelation sent shocked murmurs through the gallery. Even Madison's friends in their Team Matty shirts looked uncomfortable, realizing that maybe their influencer friend had gone too far this time. Judge Judy held up the streaming phone, the screen clearly showing the live feed and the hundreds of comments from Madison's followers. "Ms. Chen, you are in contempt of court. All devices are confiscated immediately, and you are fined $1,000 for attempting to illegally broadcast these proceedings." Madison shot out of her chair like she'd been electrified. "What? That's insane! You can't do that! This is censorship! My followers have a right to know what's happening. This is literally going to get posted everywhere. You can't silence me!" The outburst was spectacular and self-destructive. Judge Judy waited for Madison to finish her tantrum with the patience of someone who had seen this exact performance countless times before. "Ms. Chen, you have just added another $500 to your contempt fine. Sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed from this courtroom and rule in favor of the plaintiff by default." Madison sat down, but she couldn't stop herself. Under her breath, just loud enough for the courtroom microphones to pick up, she muttered, "Okay, boomer." The courtroom went dead silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a moment. Madison's own lawyer dropped his head into his hands. Her friends in the gallery suddenly became very interested in their shoes. Everyone in that room knew that Madison had just crossed a line that nobody crosses with Judge Judy. The judge's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went from stern to absolutely lethal. "Excuse me, Miss Chen, did you just call me a boomer in my courtroom?" Madison, apparently incapable of reading the room or recognizing danger, doubled down on her disrespect. "I mean, no offense, Your Honor, but you're like 80 years old. You don't understand how the internet works. This is literally my job. You're trying to cancel me for making content, which is honestly super problematic and kind of ageist if you think about it." She actually turned to look at her friends in the gallery, expecting support, expecting them to be filming this moment of her standing up to outdated authority. Instead, she saw three people who desperately wished they were anywhere else. Judge Judy let the silence stretch out, letting Madison's words hang in the air like evidence of her own stupidity. Then, with deliberate calm, Judge Judy opened a thick folder that had been sitting on her bench. "Miss Chen, you claimed this is your job. Let's discuss your business model in detail, shall we?" What Judge Judy pulled from that folder wasn't just evidence. It was a complete autopsy of Madison Chen's entire career. Every cruel video, every harassment campaign, every dollar she had earned from other people's suffering. all documented with the precision of a prosecutor building a murder case. She began by spreading printed spreadsheets across her bench, each one representing a different aspect of Madison's systematic harassment operation. Ms. Chen, you've described your content creation as harmless entertainment and generational humor. Let me show you what I've discovered about your actual business practices. Judge Judy held up the first document, her voice taking on that tone of controlled fury that had made her legendary. This is a complete archive of every video you've posted featuring service workers over the past 2 years. 47 videos total. In every single one, you deliberately provoked a confrontation, filmed someone's distress without their consent, and profited from their humiliation. Madison tried to interrupt. Your Honor, those are public spaces. I have every right to film. I'm not doing anything illegal. It's called the First Amendment. Judge Judy didn't even acknowledge the interruption. She simply continued, holding up another document. This is your earnings report, subpoenaed directly from TikTok's financial department. Video 1, showing a teenage cashier crying after you berated her for 10 minutes over a price dispute, earned you $18,000 in ad revenue. Video 2, showing an elderly Walmart greeter asking you to stop filming, earned you $22,000. Video 3, the one featuring Jessica Morales having a panic attack, earned you $31,000. Should I continue? Or are you starting to understand what you actually do for a living? Madison's face had gone pale. Those records are supposed to be private. How did you even get those? That's my personal financial information. Judge Judy's smile was razor-sharp. Discovery, Ms. Chen. When you file a lawsuit or get sued, the court has the power to subpoena relevant financial records. Perhaps you should have consulted with an actual attorney instead of getting your legal advice from TikTok comment sections. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Not even close. She pulled out another set of documents, these ones even more damaging. What made Madison's situation exponentially worse was what Judge Judy revealed next. These are screenshots from your private messages, also obtained through legal discovery. Let me read a few of them for the court. Message to your friend Kayla, dated February 10th. Going to this restaurant tonight. Gonna make the manager cry for content. LOL. The crying emoji really adds a nice touch, don't you think? Madison's hands were shaking now, gripping the edge of the defendant's table. Judge Judy continued reading. Message to someone named Tyler, dated March 3rd. Found the perfect Karen target at Starbucks. She looks like she's having a bad day already. Time to make it worse and get that viral video. Very eloquent, Ms. Chen. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for Judge Judy's voice, cold and precise as a scalpel. And my personal favorite, a message to your group chat dated the day after Jessica Morales lost her job. Just made $30,000 from that panic attack video. Best ROI ever. Who says bullying doesn't pay? All Madison was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger and humiliation. Tears of someone who was finally facing consequences and couldn't manipulate her way out. That's out of context, she sobbed. You don't understand. I was joking with my friends. Everyone talks like that in private. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet tone. Miss Chen, you weren't joking. You were planning. You were strategizing. You built an entire career on deliberately targeting vulnerable people, provoking them until they broke, then monetizing their suffering. That's not content creation. That's systematic harassment for profit. And it ends today. But Judge Judy had saved her most devastating revelation for last. She picked up a final document, this one with the TikTok logo visible on the letterhead. I've been in communication with TikTok's legal department throughout this case. They've been very interested in your business practices. particularly how you've been violating their terms of service on a systematic basis. Harassment and bullying, 47 documented violations, filming and posting content featuring individuals without consent in states where such consent is legally required. Coordinating harassment campaigns in your comment sections against your targets. Monetizing content that explicitly violates community guidelines. Madison's voice was a broken whisper. What does that mean? Judge Judy's response was delivered with the satisfaction of someone who had just executed a perfect strategic plan. It means your account is currently under review for permanent termination. TikTok has been waiting for the outcome of this case to make their final decision. And based on the evidence presented here today, I think we both know what that decision will be. The impact of those words hit Madison like a physical blow. Her entire body seemed to collapse inward. No, no, no! That's my income! That's my career! You can't do this. Hundreds of thousands of followers, years of work. You're destroying my life over some videos. Judge Judy's response was swift and merciless. No, Ms. Chen. You destroyed Jessica Morales' life. You destroyed the lives of at least 15 other people that we know of. You built a career on cruelty and called it content. I'm simply ensuring that you face consequences for your actions. Then Judge Judy delivered her verdict, and it was comprehensive and devastating. Ms. Chen, I find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. You are ordered to pay Jessica Morales $75,000 in damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, loss of income, and violation of privacy rights. You are ordered to delete all videos featuring individuals who did not provide explicit written consent to be filmed and posted. You are ordered to post a court-approved public apology that will remain pinned to any social media account you operate for a minimum of 1 year. You are permanently banned from filming in any commercial establishment without written permission from the property owner. Violation of any of these terms will result in an additional $50,000 penalty and possible jail time for contempt. Madison was sobbing uncontrollably now, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in dark streaks. This is insane. I'm going to appeal. My followers will support me. They'll help me fight this. You can't cancel me. Judge Judy picked up her gavel, ready to end this circus once and for all. Ms. Chen, your followers can't help you now. They can't pay your fines. They can't restore your account. They can't undo the damage you've caused. You gambled your entire career on the assumption that popularity equals immunity. You were wrong. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with the finality of a coffin closing. The aftermath was swift and absolutely brutal. Within hours of the verdict, TikTok permanently banned Madison's account. Hundreds of thousands of followers gone. Years of content deleted. Her primary source of income eliminated. The reason given was severe and repeated violations of community guidelines related to harassment, bullying, and coordinated harm. Instagram followed within hours. YouTube demonetized her channel by the end of the day. Twitter suspended her account for terms of service violations. Her sponsors, the fashion brands and lifestyle companies that had paid her thousands per post, dropped her immediately with public statements condemning harassment and bullying. FabFitFun tweeted, "We do not support harassment and have terminated our relationship with this creator." HelloFresh posted, "This behavior is unacceptable and does not align with our values." Fashion Nova simply deleted every post featuring her, as if she had never existed. But the internet's response was perhaps the most devastating part of Madison's destruction. Her former followers turned on her with the same mob mentality they had once directed at her victims. The hashtags #MaddiusOverParty and Justice for Jessica trended worldwide. Her video calling Judge Judy a boomer was viewed 50 million times, but not as a triumph, as evidence of her entitlement and stupidity. Commentary channels made hour-long videos dissecting her downfall. True crime podcasts covered her case as an example of social media's dark side. She became a cautionary tale, a meme, a symbol of everything wrong with influencer culture. Months later, Madison Chen's life looked nothing like the glamorous existence she had built on harassment and cruelty. She tried to return to social media under different names, but was identified and banned within a day every single time. She attempted to start a podcast called My Side of the Story, but it averaged a few dozen downloads per episode, mostly from people curious to see how delusional she remained. She was forced to get what she had always called a real job, ironically ending up working retail, the very industry she had terrorized for content. Jessica Morales used the $75,000 to pay off her debts, get therapy, and eventually found a new job with a company that supported her through the aftermath. She became an advocate for service worker protection laws, and her case inspired legislation in several states requiring consent for filming service workers and creating penalties for harassment disguised as content creation. Judge Judy's handling of the case became legendary, studied in law schools as an example of how courts can address modern forms of harassment. The case proved that follower counts mean nothing in the face of real consequences, that platforms will protect themselves over creators when legal pressure mounts, and that no amount of internet fame makes you untouchable when you've built your career on cruelty. Madison Chen learned the hardest possible lesson. In Judge Judy's courtroom, and in life, accountability always catches up with you, and your followers can't save you from the consequences of your actions. If this story proved that actions have consequences, no matter how many followers you have, smash that like button right now. Subscribe if you believe influencers should be held accountable for the real-world harm they cause. Comment below and tell me, do you think social media has made people too comfortable with cruelty? Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that clout isn't a shield against justice. Hit that notification bell because we're covering more cases where internet fame meets real-world accountability. And remember, your follower count means absolutely nothing in Judge Judy's courtroom. And that's exactly how it should be. The internet might forget, but the law never does. Consequences don't care about your engagement rate. Satisfied.